It can often feel like the diabetes tech space moves at a glacial pace. Apps take years to launch, pump designs barely change over a decade, and algorithms stall even when we know there's more that we can do. That slowdown comes from safety requirements, liability, the FDA clearance process, and reimbursement, all of which we're going to dig into today to understand why medtech innovation takes so long and the work underway to speed it up. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and research with industry leaders, physicians, and those using the tech themselves. We've got this podcast every Monday, YouTube videos on Fridays, and our website with the latest in diabetes tech and news. That is diabetic.info. Links to all those places are in the show notes. Today's guest is Shannon Lantzy. She began her career at NASA before earning a PhD in what she calls decision science, the study of how people and organizations make tough, uncertain decisions. She went on to work with the FDA and has since built a career in regulatory innovation, helping improve the way medical devices, drug, and software are evaluated, with a special focus on accelerating safe, reliable diabetes technology. Shannon and I get into how the FDA makes its decisions, how the agency works, what she's been hearing from the inside about its future, and the safeguards in place for when a new device or feature is getting cleared, and the intricacies behind why it takes so darn long. We're going to wrap up also with how she and others are currently pushing for a universal standard to help companies release products and updates faster without sacrificing safety. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this show is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Let's get into it. Shannon, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you, Justin.
Of course. So we met at ADA. You had a fantastic presentation at the D-Data Exchange. A lot about what we're going to talk about today. And I want to go even deeper on your background. Why don't you kind of just introduce yourself a little bit, like your beginnings and how you got to where you are today? That's a big bite.
Being on the other side of asking that question it's more comfortable to ask than answer. My origin story is I was a math and philosophy undergrad. I loved logic, didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but got a job at NASA headquarters. And my job as an intern was just to make sure the people on the fourth floor didn't have any technical problems, problems with their computer, their printer, their software, whatever the CIO's office covered. And the fourth floor were the people who put Spirit and Opportunity on Mars, for example. It was the Science Mission Directorate. So the offices were lined with people I would consider, they were my superheroes. Cool engineers who were managing huge projects on behalf of the American citizenry and really, really cool science projects. And that's when I fell in love with solving problems with technology for superheroes. And so that just sort of captured my attention for the rest of my life. But when I got a little frustrated at NASA and kind of had the itch to go back to school, I got a master's in information management, but that wasn't quite enough. And I was really encouraged to get a PhD. Thought I might stay in the ivory tower in academia. My PhD is in business information systems and operations research. So I call myself a decision scientist, even though that's not the name of the degree.
And what is decision science?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. When people are making really hard decisions, sometimes it's nice to break it down. And so the simplest way that everyday people might use a decision science tool is a pros cons list. Write down the criteria between car A and car B and determine what you care about and how much. So how much do you care about the color, the miles per gallon, the safety, the price point? So these are all criteria. And you and I might have different preferences. I love white cars. You might like black cars. I love electric cars, and you might like electric cars but not care that much. And this creates our decision model, and you and I might come up with a different decision for the same car. But then you have to factor in uncertainty. So if I'm trying to choose for example, a doctor, I want to choose the best diagnostician if I have a really hard diagnosis problem. I want to choose the best heart surgeon if I have a heart surgery problem. But most times people are going to the doctor and they don't know what kind of doctor they need, or what even the best is. It's a classic problem. We don't know how to directly measure physician or diagnostician quality. So it's a hard decision. People end up making it anyway. But the theory behind the economics of why people make these decisions, sometimes systematically incorrectly, vis-a-vis what the math would predict, and how in the psychology side of how we think about decisions and how we perceive risk, and how we make trade-offs between criteria. That's what I studied, and I brought it together in my dissertation about online reviews of doctors and whether or not we could use these as predictive signals of doctor quality. How does this have anything to do with FDA? You might ask. So that's
That's
half
where
of
I
the
was
origin
going.
story. um, uh, I decided that the academic world wasn't probably the best for me, and I live 3 miles up the road from FDA. Have several family members at FDA, and really fell in love with the problem of FDA is a decision-making factory. They make decisions on behalf of a population, usually the population that's indicated for a specific drug or device, or biologic. And they have to make it when there's not enough information. It's not certain. It's never, perfect. And they have to make it on behalf of a big group, not one individual. So it's a hard decision problem. And I applied for there and wanted to get a job, said I wanted to automate medical device and drug regulatory decisions. And they said, don't say that again out loud here, but offered me a job.
Why don't they want that said out loud?
It's sort of a joke. I say that tongue in cheek. I really, somebody did actually say that to me,
Yeah.
but it sounds naive. If you walk into FDA and say, I'm going to automate your regulatory decisions, it is naive, right? Until they knew where I was coming from, why I thought there, and it's sort of like a moonshot, right? You can't get there if you don't try, and you need to sort of set yourself high. There's a lot of pieces that can be automated first, and Lego bricks of modular automation or tool support. And we've come a long way since then. That was about 2015. And long story short, I didn't take that job. I took a different job, created a regulatory innovation practice at a consulting firm, and then worked inside of FDA with FDA clients in Center for Drugs and Center for Devices on decision quality, and regulatory innovation.
What attracted you to medtech?
Well, I always like solving problems for superheroes with technology. And so drugs are cool. I mean, the pharma world is cool, but just my heart's attached to tech. I love that you can write some software and make your life better for yourself, for others. And I mean, I have a Stello on. I'm a technophile. Like I wanted the first automated driving car. And I was a car person too. I love the power of a good piece of engineering.
Yeah.
Um, and then, you know, the stories of completely changing life, giving sleep back to a frightened parent who's scared of dead in bed syndrome, and the possibility of looking inside a belly instead of doing an exploratory surgery because we have point of care ultrasound. The idea that nurses can focus on empathetic care, knowing that vitals are being measured. And in the future, my dream of having a diagnostician in my front hall to give my kids tests before they tell me they have strep and they don't want to go to school that day. All of these are inspirational stories. And the first one being very much relevant to the conversation today, dead in bed syndrome for parents of little kids with type 1 completely and utterly swept my heart. And it's just, that's just who I am. Drugs are great too, but
Yeah.
the tech has my attention.
Yeah, it wasn't until I was diagnosed with diabetes that I saw the true potential of technology on the side of like saving lives, enhancing lives to a degree that it does with diabetes and outside diabetes as well. I am a huge technophile. Also, I've been in maybe 5 Waymos this week so far, driving around the city of LA with no driver. It's kind of amazing, and it feels so normal to me now. But I love beyond just being in a Waymo, understanding what the future looks like because of the Waymo today, where streets will be narrower, sidewalks will be bigger, no one will own a car. We're going to look at streets and be like, you used to park hunks of metal on the sides of these things. Like cities are going to transform. It's going to take time, but I don't look at just where tech is now, and neither do you. It seems it's like, no, what's that moonshot? Where are we headed, and how do we get there? And I'm so glad that you're here to talk a little bit about that today. What about the diabetes space? Kind of like, what brought you there?
So multiple connection points. I mean, one, I have friends and family members with type 1, but I didn't know about their tech, and it didn't capture my attention until I learned at FDA. So I was, as I mentioned, I worked with the Center for Drugs, and we're working on a pilot decision science and decision consult support for really hard drug decisions. So the hardest FDA decisions, I shouldn't say just FDA, Center for Drugs, Center for Devices, they go to an advisory committee where FDA presents their decision problem, and the advisory committee, usually made up of academic researchers, maybe somebody from industry, and at least one patient representative, they debate. I mean, they really have it out to try to find the edges of the decision. And I had the opportunity to pay very close attention to and work together with some teams inside of FDA on Sutagoflozin, which is an SGL2. And there was a group of humans with an impassioned pleas at that advisory committee saying, I want this drug. And this drug, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a doctor, but I looked at the facts of the submission and what I could find publicly, and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm only saying publicly available information here. This is in 2018. I think in 2024, I was there at 2018. So the first submission of this drug that was already on the market for type 2. It would have been the first ever pharmaceutical for treatment of insulin requiring diabetes or type 1. And the benefits on the clinical trial were middling, kind of good, but nice, right? Some weight loss, some hypertension reduction, and more time in range. But if I recall correctly, the A1C wasn't like the standout great benefit, the A1C measure. And then there was also an 8-fold increased risk signal of diabetic ketoacidosis. And when I read about DKA, I thought, this is terrifying. Nobody should want this. And then when I heard about it, this is a risk I live with every single day. Don't tell me whether or not I should accept this risk. I've dealt with it my whole life. And so there's total different preferences from people living with type 1 versus my naive reaction just reading the evidence and versus what the reviewers say. But even the reviewers disagreed. The reviewers disagreed with each other about how they'd weigh those benefits and risks. And so I had the honor of facilitating an exercise to show them that there was some subjectively, and I'm motioning to my hands here, I know we're on a podcast, but there was some subjectively held opinions about the weighting of these benefits and risks. Like, how much would I trade an 8-fold risk of DKA for that collection of benefits? Or how much would I trade an 8-fold risk increase of DKA for 2 points of A1C, right? And that's not a question you can say, hey, how much would you trade? And just believe the answer for most people. That was a full-on introduction to the trade-off question on product assessment, but also a complete sort of introduction to a community of humans who manage their disease every single day, and whose the regulators are making decisions, and they may wildly disagree. And for my context, okay, this is where we need to make the decisions of FDA better and better and better, and reduce any friction that we possibly can, so that companies can innovate to meet all the unmet or undermet medical needs of people who frankly have way more burden just to stay alive and have a good day than most.
Yeah, this term that you've mentioned to me, tolerable failure, that's what they're looking for, right?
That's how I phrase it. So when I was talking to at D Data, I said, "What if we could accelerate medical device innovation to the pace of consumer innovation?" Usually, people's like perk up. All right, well, why don't we? Well, in consumer tech, generally, we can tolerate failure. If my Angry Birds game, stops working, I tolerate that failure. Even if my email app stops working, I can tolerate that failure in most
I can't tolerate
contexts.
that.
Depends on the context of use, right? There's certain populations of users, certain use cases where you can't tolerate that, right? If my pump stops working, I can't tolerate that. Or what's worse, somebody proved on a cybersecurity stage, if I can show that I can remotely deliver a fatal bolus of insulin from my own pump, that's intolerable, predictable, foreseeable misuse. And so my layman's description of what FDA does, FDA and other regulators require evidence that predictable failures have been brought down to tolerable levels. And so you do that with a clinical trial for a drug. You do that with software assurance and cybersecurity for software. You do that with lots of testing, lots of regression testing and traceability to requirements for hardware and software and other systems. And the complexity can be vast. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 10-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic. It's so easy to complain about the speed of medical technology, our pumps and CGMs. Like, why have we had the same form factor for many of these for 12 plus years? Why aren't the apps updating as quickly as your iPhone or Android would update every year? There's a new iPhone and Android phones every single year, right? Why can't we have these updated pumps? And I know that there's a lot that goes into that. Can you explain to us like why it is a slow process? Like why is it purposefully slow?
Yeah. So the good reason is so that the tech doesn't accidentally kill you or do something that's irreversible, or you start to rely on something and suddenly you're having a really bad day for many strings of days. That it's better to have slower tech so that we have more assurance that foreseeable failures are tolerable rather than intolerable. One of the answers is basic economics. There's just scale. So at least in type 1 diabetes, there's millions of users, potential users, and type 2, I should say. For CGMs, there's millions of potential users, but many more so than cars or iPhone users, or many fewer so, rather. So scale is an issue, the basic economics, and then there's the nasty economics of reimbursement. It's a mess. After FDA clears, getting reimbursement isn't guaranteed. Getting reimbursement for a software update isn't guaranteed. So there's just many ways to get paid back for your investment as an innovator. And then there's just a huge startup cost, right, for delivering a safety critical system that keeps humans alive in a specific hardware system. It's amazing that people still do it. And I think you'd probably find that 80% of or more, the Pareto principle rule, that most people who are developing medtech are not doing it because they think it's a good business idea. They're doing it because they have a personal need and drive to solve the problem.
Yeah, the stories from people within this industry are incredible. They are affected by diabetes. They have it themselves, and just so many people doing this are doing it because they really care. And that's what keeps me so hopeful about this space.
There's the bad reasons we're slow too.
Well, yeah, and I want to.
Legacy, old organizational dynamics, the regulatory regulations that grew up when med tech was just hardware, not software, CMS reimbursement, that grew up in an age when it was just hardware and not software. And so there's the areas that I want to carve out. Obama said a scalpel, and Trump said 2-for-1 regulation deletion. For every one new regulation, let's delete 2. Every single administration wants less regulation so that we take away the undue burden. And the question is, which are the ones that we can cut out and how?
Yeah.
And I think we're at the point where industry can propose and offer those accelerants, and FDA just has to say, yep, you've proven it, you can do it.
Yeah, it's a big moment, right? And
Yeah.
AI is so overused, but AI will be a part of all of this. And there's a lot of there's a lot going on, especially with like our government and the FDA. And I want to get to that because I think it's an important part of the story of like where we could go and like the good and the bad that can come from it. But I want to hit on something you just said, which was the med tech system wasn't built for pumps and CGMs that theoretically could be updated like an iPhone, right? This was built for, oh, you need a new hip? Like, well, let's clear a new hip or whatever that is. Can you explain that to us? How was the current system that the FDA uses built originally for? Like, what was it for?
Well, if you go back to the 70s, when the first national medical device regulation was coming about, the problems that people were reporting were things like an implant, an IUD, was causing massive pain and bleeding in women who were using it, for example. And so the regulations started off from lack of safety, and that's true of drugs as well. And just by nature of what a device was in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't software filled. You built it, you tested it, and then you shipped the thing. And you shipped the exact same thing as much as possible. And if you updated it, FDA was smart and said, you got to check with us before you change anything. And a recent example is there was a CPAP continuous positive airway and pressure manufacturer, somebody who can help with a device that helps with sleep apnea. They changed out foam. And so that foam, the new foam, ended up killing a lot of people. It was a big famous recall. But anyways, you swap out a little component and the safety of the whole entire device might change. And that was just foam, right? And so in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, most things were just not software, and the evolution of how we regulate comes from what problems crop up in the market. And then connectivity happened and software happened, and the speed of problems that can crop up is changing dynamically, not just in medical devices, but also all the interaction with all of our other systems. And so, I mean, just simple things like, have you ever thought about if you were in an environment where the wireless bands for communication were saturated, and your pump couldn't talk to your CGM couldn't talk to your controller, which couldn't talk to your pump anymore? If you were in that environment, your pump would basically be bricked. Well, that environment exists. It's called DEF CON in Las Vegas. And last time I was there, somebody with type 1 said, my pump's not working anymore, and headed to the hospital and thought he was hacked. But it was really just probably the devices not being able to communicate to each other.
Yeah, I have issues when I'm at like conferences, like the Bluetooth craps out and my devices can't connect.
Like, you don't know unless you know.
Yeah, well, sometimes I do have to leave the show floor, and I'm like, all right, let me just leave so I can get some automation going again, because it's a very real thing. I'll have no numbers for an hour. I'll be like, what? And then my levels are up. It's always at conferences, and I'm like, oh, wow, I haven't had readings for an hour. Like, my pump doesn't know what to do.
Right. I will also say there's another thing, like there's great consumer tech, or there's even great national security tech that has a lot of security built in. But the assumptions that you use to build, for example, national security technology don't necessarily apply to healthcare. So in national security, when you're saying, I want to make sure that my laptop can only talk to the classified server if we have an encrypted connection. And if my laptop's certificate that proves that I am authenticatable is expired, then the classified server is going to say, no, we're not speaking to you. That's a basic encrypted communication, but and a basic sort of rule. You fail closed. If the certificate's invalid, you don't get to talk to the classified server. Well, what happens if that's a surgical robot? Or what happens if that's your pump in your CGM? Your certificate's expired. You still want to use the device to deliver clinical care. And so it's a different set of assumptions, different set of requirements, and the technology solutions that existed in national security, we can't just port over to for medtech. So we got to build it new. But national security's got a lot more money for cybersecurity or software assurance than the medtech industry did originally until new regulations were put into place.
Gotcha. What were the new regulations that allowed that?
Yeah, so FDA constantly puts out new guidance whenever there's safety signals or issues that crop up where they're regulating based on their knowledge of what's going on in the system. They usually publish guidance to continuously inform med device makers of how they are applying their statutory authority. So cybersecurity guidance, pre-market considerations for quality systems and cybersecurity. Don't quote me on the title of that guidance, but it says, you have to do all these things and assure that you've got, security, encryption, authentication. And then FDA said, you know what, we can require this stuff in guidance, but we even need more teeth. And the industry together actually went to Congress and said, we think FDA needs actually new explicit requirements and statutory authorities for cybersecurity. And they sought it and got it in 2023, or was it 24? FDA requiring specific new attestations and proof that software-enabled or cyber devices or internet-connected devices, the definition's hard to word in a layman's term, would be had a reasonable expectation of being secure at birth and secure throughout the life of the device.
Gotcha. Your role at the FDA, you were doing contract work for them, right? Like what was the work you were doing there?
The umbrella is regulatory innovation. So FDA is a regulator, helping them do better. One of the projects that I had the honor to lead was the most recent independent assessment of FDA's performance on the Medical Device User Fee Act. So in evaluating FDA's performance across the commitment letter for the User Fee Act, which is a negotiated set of terms every 5 years between industry and FDA. Another was piloting the concept of doing decision support consults for review teams that were facing very particularly difficult decisions. We did that in CDER and CDRH, Center for Drugs, Center for Devices, and Radiological Health. Another great program, which was innovative, was opioid regulation. Has a lot of hairy, thorny, interconnected issues. So if you approve a new opioid indication or a new type of packaging or pill, it can have negative effects on the market. And so we modeled the system of acute pain sufferers and opioid use disorder and death. And it was a policy analysis tool. It's a technology to support policy analysis for tough opioid decisions.
Wow. What you're saying kind of reminds me of, I just watched the show recently, it came out a while ago, Dope Sick, all about Oxycontin and this extremely addictive drug that got cleared through the FDA, maybe like 15 years ago, 20, not recently, that it got cleared and ruined lives, killed tons of people in this country, like from overdoses and suicides and whatever. And to me, it was like, well, I can't trust the FDA. If the FDA allows an extremely addictive drug to have a label that says this is not addictive, then how could I ever trust them again?
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Something gets cleared and it harms a lot of people. So what's the deal? How did that happen? I have a lot of thoughts. One, you got to know what was submitted to the FDA. If companies flat out lie and falsify their data, that can be a reason why FDA makes a bad decision. So that's a problem. Another thing is regulations are made in blood. So when there's an error, there's usually a new regulation to solve that error. I did study this problem, but I can't remember exactly what the issues were in terms of FDA approving the original Purdue Pharma indication. However, I will say it's trickier than you would think, because on the flip side of that, how many people do you know who've had a hip surgery, a knee surgery, a heart surgery, and they may never have chosen to dramatically increase their quality of life because of the massive amount of pain that they would be in after the surgery? Not to mention the fact that your surgery outcomes get skyrocket when you can walk after a hip surgery or a knee surgery, like PT, right? And opioids help us do that. I mean, there's a reason why we keep prescribing them. And then, so on the other side, there is it's why are we talking about the FDA here? What about the company? Because the company is the one that knows everything about their drug.
Yeah,
FDA
they knew a
knows a
lot.
lot, but who knows everything? And so then you've got that, and that's why we have a healthy tension, right? We have a third party, non-interested reviewer in the FDA. But here's an example, a true one. People were crushing pills, and those pills were getting, or the crushed powder got snorted, right? And get high. A company proposed and got a clearance for a pill that wasn't crushable, so that there may mitigate these snorting, the issues that come, like overdoses that came with snorting or opioid use disorder. Well, it seems logical, right? Pill's not crushable, people won't snort it anymore.
They'll find a way.
Do? What did they do? They melted it and started injecting it.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Like,
did they not?
and then what happens when we start controlling fentanyl? When we get illicit fentanyl. And so is FDA, I mean, this is a core policy question. Is FDA's job not to allow misuse, or is FDA's job to solve unmet medical needs and also rely on other regulators like the DEA to solve those problems? It's not, I'm not actually advocating for one decision or another. What I'm trying to show is empathy for the decision context. One of the problems is that FDA doesn't get to go defend themselves. The companies can say whatever they want, news reporters can say whatever they want, but FDA never discloses the trade secrets that were submitted to them. And so the actual context of the deepest parts of the decision may never see to light if FDA is the only one who has the reason to say it.
Is there, this is a huge tangent, but I have one more follow-up question. How big is lobbying with the FDA? Are there a lot of lobbyists from these pharma companies trying to get the FDA to do things? I feel like that could have been a part
Absolutely.
of the OxyContin.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, every company is going to argue as hard as possible and pull every lever for their business context, for their business success. And yes, absolutely. But I'll tell you a story that might have a flip response. The first Trump administration came in, I think I mentioned earlier, they said for every one new regulation, we're going to take away two, and we're going to take away FDA's authority to regulate efficacy. We're just going to ask FDA to regulate for safety. And so pharma, the capital pharma, the the drug lobbyist, largest drug lobbyist, said, no, Trump administration, we need FDA. Because FDA is a third party, unbiased reviewer and attests to the efficacy of the evidence and the efficacy of a drug. You need that to be on the market. And so drug companies would not be able to sell their drugs, and people wouldn't be able to rely on the veracity of those drug claims, and therefore be able to take the drug to solve their problem if FDA wasn't around. The function has to be served for the market to have efficiency.
Who's at the FDA? Who works there?
Who works at FDA? everybody. But the people who make review decisions are biomedical engineers, clinicians, toxicologists, pharmacists. I say clinicians, which means medical doctors too, statisticians, people like me who are sort of eclectic. Let's see, really highly specialized experts. One of the problems with the reductions in force of this Trump administration is they just chopped off all the probationary employees, which meant anybody who was at the FDA 1 or 2 years or less. And that included a ton of new hires from PhDs. FDA will take an emerging issue that is never before foreseen because it's a brand new technology problem and find the people who are studying it at MIT, at University of Georgia, wherever, to find the 1 or 2 or 6 people who are studying it with the most specificity, like new nanotechnologies a couple years ago, and hire them as basically postdocs so that they can stay ahead of the current developments in technology. And they all got, those people who were there less than 2 years got riffed. And a lot of them got hired back because the lobbyists actually went to the administration and said, you're messing with our industry. This is going to be harmful. Please don't do that. And then they got hired back. That story didn't get told enough in the press, but that decision was reversed.
That's great. Yeah, I want to get into more of like the pipeline of tech now, but we're on this FDA kick, so I want to continue with this. It's been a pretty tumultuous time for the US government. A lot of changes, DOJ, FDA's affected it. It's good to hear that, they've kind of reversed some decisions based off of like the needs for the whole area. I know that you had some optimism with the current FDA commissioner, Marty McCary.
Yes. So, well, as soon as he was nominated, I read his most recent book, Blind Spots, and it lays out his position about how medical consensus can sometimes get it wrong, counter to the evidence, and that consensus and institutionalized thinking should not be what we drive policy with. And so he was controversial for some of his policies on COVID or personal beliefs on COVID and herd immunity. But beyond that, I loved the way he wrote that book. It is a great reminder that science isn't a religion. It's an investigation it's a way to generate knowledge, even when it's not popular. And so I recommend the book to anybody who's interested in these subjects. That being said, my initial optimism that after the trauma has somewhat attenuated, because now that most of the rifts are probably done, I'm not inside of FDA right now, but I talk to people who are, and what I perceive they need is some hopeful leadership and setting a new narrative that renews the respect and awe that we owe FDA reviewers for doing the very hard, often thankless, often silent and unrecognized work on behalf of the American public, and, since we're leaders in the world, of the globe.
The FDA does some incredible work, and I hear that a lot at these conferences and from these device manufacturers, the pumps and the CGMs. They have a lot of respect for the FDA and work very close with them and have nothing but good things to say about their experiences whenever I ask about, clearance and stuff like that. And I don't want any of this episode to necessarily shed bad light on them. We can be critical, but also very aware that they have a very thankless job, like you said, and they do a lot of good work.
Who else has a thankless job who often gets criticized? Parents. I would say everything I learned about being a good parent, I learned from FDA, which isn't nice because my own parents are great. But FDA doesn't control medical device manufacturers. They set a high bar and say you have to meet this. FDA offers free consulting and offers breakthrough programs and tries to do its best to pull people through to be high enough to get on, reach the bar to get on the market. And then once it's on the market, they pay attention. But the company's got to do what they need to do in order to live and survive independently, and don't mess up too much, or else the parent might pull them back a little bit, right? So if you ever want to criticize the FDA, think about your parents, and if they're worthy of criticism, okay, fine, and also they make mistakes. I mean, sometimes they're asked to do something, and there's too much work. And that's, FDA needing to get to continue, like any organization, to grow and be efficient. But also they're also asked to make decisions for which nobody's ever had to make a decision before, right?
Yeah.
And so brand new things that span specialties, there's no one human who can review it well. So there's going to be some friction.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. I want to better understand the pipeline that these devices are going through that we use day to day, like our pumps and our CGMs and even the apps that we're using. Can you explain to us kind of what, and maybe it's different for each device, but like what the typical testing pipeline looks like for, let's say, a new insulin pump?
So I wish I could look in every single pump and CGM manufacturer and see their testing pipeline. I think we'd probably see a lot of variation. I have seen inside of some companies, but I have to talk in some generality. In an ideal world, some new code is written. It's tested against every single test case that is relevant, like from functional testing that is just code-based to clinical testing, like could this affect how my insulin's delivered, and human testing, right? So UI. In an ideal world, all of those tests are done for every tiny snippet of code change. And proof that it is all done exists, and that it's all done well, and we can determine all of the tests that possibly need to happen. And anytime we miss something, we make a new test and incorporate it into that pipeline. So the ideal world is we have an automated integration pipeline. We have continuous integration and continuous delivery of software updates that are tested to the fullest extent of all adverse events or problems that we know about. That is the ideal future. And even some of the biggest software and tech companies in the world don't have it right. We need a moonshot, organized effort that's going to take more than any one company's profit motive or any one advocacy organization's desire, any one government funding, or any one regulator's decision-making. Everybody's got to come together and say, we want an automated test pipeline so that we can ship software much faster. You asked what it actually looks like. It's anything from one human looking at something and trying to test it while they're developing something new to a really complex 500-person engineering organization, plus tons of processes and systems and tooling to try to do what I described.
And it's the companies are paying the FDA, right, to get clearance. They have to pay a lot of money for that, right? Do they
pay? They pay to get their to have reviews. They pay, but
Okay.
a lot of updates don't have to be re-reviewed. They can be part of the quality system, the quality plan. The major updates might need an FDA check, but it's an accelerated check, not like an original 510K or an original PMA.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's focus for a second on automated insulin dosing. It is a complex algorithm that I credit Lane Desborough. This is not my information, but Lane shared with me that there's basically one major algorithm, generation, and we haven't seen a new algorithm generation since the first one came out. And in an ideal world, you'd be able to grab an algorithm and say, I'm going to use this one while I'm pregnant. I'm going to use this one while I'm training for triathlons. And I'm going to use this one while I'm on vacation. But we don't have that. Why? Well, you have to do all of that testing every time you want to change an algorithm. Not to mention, you also have to do integration testing. If Dexcom changes how it ships glucose data, and pump hardware changes. So there's all these changes that could change an algorithm. The way to test algorithms is with a simulator. But right now, most and the big companies have simulation systems to test their algorithms. But the alternative is clinical trials. And so the FDA and a lot of innovators have been trying really hard to match the quality of evidence for testing algorithms to see if you're going to have a bad day, a really bad day, or a pretty good day, instead of testing with clinical trials or as much clinical trial evidence, rather push that over to simulation. The other piece is simulation can test for example, test cases for toddlers. I don't think we usually put toddlers in clinical trials, or pregnant women, and other sort of edge cases that would be irresponsible to put people through, or hopefully even folks that just never sign up for a clinical trial. You want to be able to test the effects on them too. And simulators are better at that than nothing, absolutely, and sometimes a lot better than clinical trials itself.
Yeah, last time we spoke, you also mentioned to me that there's a complication, or there are more things to look at when you're integrating a new device. So if a pump company already supports one CGM, but they want to bring integration with another CGM, that it's not as simple as like, all right, let's just connect this. Like there's a lot that's going into there. There's a reason that process is really slow, right?
Right. One of the examples I like is one that I read from one of the pump companies recently. The pump had unexpected behavior when a person put a second CGM on their body before like the session ended for the first CGM. And so this was the unexpected behavior, and the pump delivered a bolus when it shouldn't, or didn't when it should have. I'm not sure. And so there was a recall notice for that pump. If my memory serves, and this is recent, I think this is ongoing right now.
Yeah, we put it out. It was delivering unwanted insulin during a sensor warm-up period if you overlapped sensors, which I have like a YouTube video all about, like overlap your sensor, which you're allowed to do.
Right.
Like it's allowed.
Okay, so you say it's allowed, but which company allows it? Is it the CGM that says it's okay to put the second one on and let it warm it up? And do they say that same statement? Is it in the labeling? And are Tandem and Insulet?
I don't think it's in the labeling.
Okay, so or is it in the user? So where is it such that the integration partner, the pump, would say, I know how to take signal from two at once and differentiate between the two and not deliver, boluses that shouldn't be delivered. So that is a test that once you find that there's a problem there, it needs to go into never happening again. And this, once you find a problem, make it never happen again. It sounds like it may be simple, but it is not. I mean, that could be $1 million project in just making sure that never happens again. If you add up all the humans that have to work on it for however many months, easily. So $1 million might be a wild underestimate, unless you have a system of making the testing pipeline as efficient as possible.
And then the question is, whose job is it? Is it the CGM job? Is it the CGM's company's job to like make it so that it doesn't send those connections to the pump on the second sensor? Or is it the pump? Or do they have to both split the time and the money, and then they have to negotiate, who's manpower?
Negotiate one and the other, like maybe I'm naming companies now because I think Insulet and Tandem is like the dominant pump companies, right? Like, they probably have 80% of the market. You could tell me, but like, if Insulet is like, cool, I'm going to agree with you, CGM company, that this is how we're going to handle it. But Tandem doesn't want to do it that way. then what do you do? Then do you
Wow.
fork your software so that you've got different software that deals with these two differently? Does the bigger gorilla get to just say, nope, this is how it's going to be, and then the smaller gorillas decide not to, not or how they're going to deal with it? And that's just one example. Another
Well,
example is who's legally liable for complaints.
well, I was just gonna say, like, if we're just gonna let all of these companies battle it out for whose job it is, meanwhile people are getting insulin sent to them that shouldn't be, then shouldn't there be a regulatory office that's like, this is how it's getting done. We need to do this right this second, right?
The regulatory office doesn't tell them how to do it. They just tell them what to do. So they say you got to work this out, or it's already written into the 510(k) or the de novo who needs to do it, or it was missed and not actually written in the regulation itself. But if FDA and other regulators told companies how to implement, then it would depress innovation. So
Okay.
FDA has to be like a good parent.
Mm-hmm.
They don't say, I mean, did your parents tell you which college you had to go to or which mic you had to buy? If like you don't want a parent to be over
Mm-hmm.
rotating because you
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to flourish and do what you need to do. It's not unlike what innovators need. They need freedom to innovate.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Lane Desborough. He's the co-founder of Night Scout and Bigfoot, and he's working with Beta Bionics now, right, on some sort of computer module to streamline. Can you tell us a little bit about what work he's doing?
So I think Lane is supporting a number of tech companies, including the bigs and the smalls, in upping their game with simulators for testing. And so there's a bunch of use cases for an automated insulin delivery interoperability framework and a simulation framework. The project that is easy to talk about because it's in the public sphere is Helmsley Charitable Trust's funded Lane to create an open source simulator, and it's under the name of Automated Insulin Delivery Interoperability Framework, with the theory that if an open source tool was available for testing, how a new glucose monitor will work with an established pump, or testing those use cases like the toddlers and the pregnancies, or testing or having standardized tests for how is a whole population going to handle this new technology versus just a very active and participatory clinical trial population. Like, can we generalize these events? Right now, companies have their own simulators. It's very hard to create a simulator that's really robust and well characterized. So the idea is if there's one that's open and available to multiple companies, it could become a test standard. And the key and the really exciting thing, by the way, test standard, if regulatory people are listening, there is a standard with a capital S, and then there's standards like lowercase s that a lot of people use. He's not building it to be a capital S standard, although it probably could become it. What he is doing is my favorite new thing.
What is it?
He's working directly with everybody he needs to work with to get it cleared as qualified as a medical device development tool. And so this is an generally unknown FDA pathway for qualifying tools that help make better medical devices. Anything that can either prove or evaluate the safety, efficacy, or performance of a medical device. And so I see this MDDT program as a pathway for scalable regulatory innovation. So whereas FDA wants to do better and people have good ideas, and then the humans create new projects to try to make FDA better, which we have a long history of. And I mentioned a couple projects earlier, a big project like digital health and pre-cert were attempts to do that as well. They're all human-based. The medical device development tool allows industry to say, here's a tool that I could scale in the marketplace if people want to use it, to speed up and maintain the quality of medical device decisions or regulatory decisions.
So you're currently working on a moonshot project.
Yes.
How does that fit into all of this?
We call it the T1D Tech AID system moonshot. I'm open to better names, by the way. We need something a little more catchy.
Let us
with
know in the
the
comments
yeah,
on YouTube.
exactly. Um, the idea is, what if we could automate the testing pipeline and make it so that it's a lot cheaper to do a very good job of testing all the things we just talked about: the cyber, the software assurance, the clinical validation with the simulator, and ideally even the people reported outcomes of your subjective, like, did you have a good day? You might be good time and range, you might have good A1C, but did you have a good day? And how much work did you have to do to maintain that? All of those measures, if we could have streaming data and a tool set, could dramatically speed up the shipping of new software features. The technology is here. It's just not yet evenly distributed. So pulling together people from different disciplines, from cybersecurity, from bank compliance assurance, from medical device manufacturers who justifiably have a precarious situation. They don't get a lot of profit in comparison to like other big tech companies, and then big tech, and then small tech, new innovators, and then the government. How do you compose all of those disparate, sometimes non-communicating parts of the world? Well, a moonshot. And so I have proposed, and I've talked to a number of stakeholders about a moonshot, an automated testing pipeline to ship software features and hopefully algorithms to T1D tech.
So what are the next steps for that? Where do you go from this idea to actually getting it going?
Thank you so much for asking. So first step, we, two co-authors of mine, Josiah Dykstra and Eugene Wasserman, we co-authored a paper. We held listening sessions with stakeholders from medical device companies, so T1D tech companies, regulators and former regulators, cyber experts like offensive, like hackers and pen testers. And we held these listening sessions to examine the possibilities. We wrote a paper and are publishing it in HealthSec. We submitted it to a conference, HealthSec. So that's hopefully going to bring in some of the cybersecurity folks. What I'd like to do is hold a workshop in October, in the beginning stages of planning. Open to help, by the way, if anybody's out there and wants to help. Taking an opportunity that's coming off a prior scheduled project for ARPA-H and for the Center for Health Security to have a San Diego-based workshop to characterize this moonshot, make it sound better. You're invited, Justin, if you'd like to go. Make it sound better, characterize what it means, what kind of solutions we need, what kind of problems exist, and basically like form the beginning interconnected fabric of these disparate silos of the world. And then I want to take that and propose it, probably get some funding for the moonshot itself, mostly as an organizing construct, kind of like the way Amy does with DData. And she might be actually a great person to bring in and host it. We've talked about that a little bit. And then hopefully we'll have something by Q1 next year to submit to ADA, and then the snowball shall fall where it does.
Yeah, we'll put a link to get more information on that in our landing page for this episode on diabetic.info.
Oh, that's
so if
awesome.
anyone wants to learn more, RSVP, whatever, send you a thought on this episode, I'm sure they can do all that through there. So
I will say one more thing. The two people I worked closest with from FDA on medtech cybersecurity after I left my job at the consulting firm were two former reviewers in the diabetes branch. So I had the opportunity to learn in depth how very highly technical humans at FDA were thinking about and reviewing diabetes technologies. And I believe this is possible. It's just going to take a lot of people having the belief in the dream and making it palatable in terms of risk and cost across the right matrix of people. And it's just not naturally happening yet, but it's very close.
If I've learned anything about this community and people with drive and passion and direction like you, is that it really is possible. And what I've seen with this open source community and what they've done with building algorithms and beyond that, coming out with new features like one we just reported on the podcast a week ago, which was like all about an AI food search where you can take pictures and it will like give you diabetes notes and pre-fill the carb count in an automated insulin system, like for you. Like it will be your little diabetes advisor. I have it on my phone right now.
Oh my
There's,
God, I
and
can't
that's
wait to
not
see the
help.
regulatory
Oh,
submission on that.
well,
And
if
it will
there
be
is,
harder than you'd
yep.
think, but it should be doable. It should be doable. If
Eh,
anybody's working on that and needs references to great regulatory consultants or wants to talk to me about how to get that feature through, let's talk.
yeah,
But my guess is that we'll see it come out of the big companies very soon.
hopefully, and we've seen it, Loop, the open source Loop, went in and used data from their users, thousands of users, to get a cleared version of the Loop algorithm, which is now coming out on an insulin pump that's FDA cleared, right? So these communities, these people are setting the standard of what is possible because they're not held back by the FDA yet, and they can just do it, so that other companies can come in and then do it. They want these big companies to steal their ideas. So I'm very hopeful about your endeavors. And I don't know, there just is so much power in this community,
No
and I'm sure
question.
you've been seeing that going to these
Absolutely.
events, right? You're an
Absolutely.
outsider a bit. You don't have type 1 yourself. You've kind of surrounded it, but now you're going to these conferences and meeting these people.
Yeah. I've wanted to knock on the door of the community and say, "Well, can I visit? Can I be here?" I will earn my I will earn my stripes because the innovation, the connection, and the heart in the community, not just with people with type 1, but people who are contributing because there's some connection, is it's the spice of life, really. Like and wonderful reason to work hard. Um, I'll just one quick example. I heard Howard Look speak for the first time, I think in 2016 at like a conference, Health Data Palooza. So Howard Look, the founder and longtime CEO of Tide Pool, and he stood up and said, "I'm going to build tech the way that I built it for TiVo and AWS. I'm not going to build it the way the medtech regulators expect us because that's not how software works." And that tiny little company was the only public company that participated in FDA's regulatory innovation pilot for pre-cert. And this was a concept to get software flowing faster and faster through regulatory. And that like all innovations, it had risk, and that specific innovation died. But pre-cert had 9 pilot participants, including Apple and I think a bunch of other med tech companies.
Yeah.
And Tide Pool was the only one that we got to learn in public about because Tide Pool was radically open. And I have a deep appreciation, was completely inspired, and hounded Howard to be one of my podcast guests. And I, as one of the honors of getting to have a podcast is getting to have conversations with superheroes like Lane and Howard.
Yeah,
So
Howard's come on my show as well.
I
It
am sure to
was
hear it.
People got
That
to listen.
you have an amazing set of interviewees, guests, and a community of listeners. It's a cool platform you built.
Thank you. And we've got another great guest right here. And also, I'm gonna be on your podcast at some point. And I know that there's I forget, what are we gonna talk about?
I think I'm going to talk about you. How did you start to do what you do? And you're a fabric of the innovation community. So I like to tell people who don't know about either T1 or folks like you. I'm pretty excited that you agreed to come on. Feels like
Yeah, me too. It'll be great.
I get a celebrity.
Oh, well, shucks. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad that I met you. I knew from the second you took the stage at D-Data, I was like, she's coming on my podcast. Like, this is just everything she has to say right now. Like, I need my audience to hear. So I appreciate you coming here, and I'd love to stay in touch. Well, we will obviously stay in touch, but when it comes to this show, like as there's advancements in movement or just any big news stories, FDA, pharma, like I'd love to have you on again and talk about that stuff. So
What an
That'd be great.
honor. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'd be happy to follow up on any of the stuff we've talked about today.
Well, this episode definitely gives me some hope on the future, and hopefully these processes will be put in place to speed up everything and keep its safety going, because I'd love to see all of our pumps and our CGMs and our algorithms and our apps just get the updates sooner, get the upgrades, get the upgraded hardware sooner. Anyway, what do you think of this conversation? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you subscribe, whether it be on our podcast platforms and on YouTube, where we've got video playing during these episodes, and head over to diabetic.info where you can sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter. I'm Justin, and I'll talk to you later.